you receive a phone call while you're having your dinner in London with your family, and you receive that call informing that your mother, who's age 75, has fallen in the bathroom and is heavily bleeding in brain, and there is no one to look after. Due to 96% rejection rate, many doctors and highly qualified people are leaving the UK because they cannot bear the fact of leaving their parents to die. When I applied for this visa, I got a refusal on unlawful grounds where the Home Office erred in applying the law, and they rejected. I had to go all the way to first tribunal, have my day in the court, and I can proudly say today they're not only settled today, they are British citizens. Adult dependent relative visa is a settlement visa which is granted from outside of the UK. And to do that, you need a sponsor who's either settled in the UK or a British citizen. You can sponsor your parents, grandparents, brother, sister above the age of 18 in the adult dependent relative visa category. But you would be able to only do that if they require daily care because they're not able to do it themselves. As a result of either old age, disability, or illness, they are unable to look after themselves. What it means by look after themselves is cooking, washing, going to toilet, taking medication, and looking after themselves. There is a legal test which is extremely difficult, and that is what you need to meet. When people apply for adult dependent relative visa, the courts and the Home Office very well know that the children of elderly dependents, they would make emotional statements, they will even provide medical documentation stating that this is the disease. But the Home Office and the courts look beyond that. They want independent evidence which is prepared objectively and meets the high threshold. Now, what is that legal test? I'm going to explain you. The first limb of the test is that your parents, the applicant, is unable to look after themselves for daily care. The second limb of the test is if they're facing an illness, that either that treatment is not available in the home country, and if that treatment is available, then this treatment is not affordable. Now, to prove that treatment is not affordable is extremely challenging, and I can tell you from my personal experience, this is where I not only met the legal test burden, but the sheer volume of the evidence that I had resulted in overturning the visa refusal decision. Now, when you prove these two limbs of the test, then it comes down to whether the applicant is of good character, suitability. For example, have you ever broken the immigration condition? For example, your parents came on a visitor visa. Have they overstayed? Have they got a NHS debt that they owe more than £500? Have they got any criminal convictions? Even if you meet these legal tests, the two limbs that I just explained, if they find one reason, they will reject your visa. So it's not very simple that you fill up the form and you submit it, because the visa fees is in excess of £3,700 check per applicant. So you need to understand is that you cannot just wake up one day and just apply for this visa. It requires planning and strategy. And I think that is where my story comes into the play, because it will help you understand how to plan. Now, in terms of objective evidence, what the courts are looking for, that it is provided by an independent expert. Now, you can say my parents' doctor is saying that my father is facing dementia. He's got type 2 diabetes. My mother has got, for example, osteoarthritis. She's also type 2 diabetes. So he's going to write that, and there is medication to prove that. Will that meet the burden? The answer is no, because the treatment of whatever illness or disability they have is presently available. So what else can you do to meet the limb number 2 if you say they cannot look after themselves due to age or disability? So what you need to do is that find out what would it take you to look after them in the home country in terms of cost. Now, this is extremely important, and to do that, you have two steps to take. The first one, to prove that they require daily care where they cannot do any of the tasks themselves. For example, if somebody's having Alzheimer's or cannot remember things or requires daily constant care, you tried keeping maids, but they leave because sometimes the elderly person becomes too aggressive or irritative, so nobody stays. So first thing that you need is you need an independent medical expert who can confirm that what you're claiming is factually true. Now, many people make the mistake of hiring a local expert, for example, in India, and try to get a letter which they submit in the application, like I did, and it was refused. What can you do is you first need to ensure that when you apply for this visa, the first thing you should do is instruct a UK solicitor or a direct access barrister. Because when you have a UK solicitor or a barrister, it will be extremely valuable for you and it will be beneficial for you, because if you submit it yourself, you can be 96% certain from the statistics that I've seen that your visa will be refused. In my case, they refused the visa on unlawful grounds. I applied for adult dependent relative visa. They refused on the partner route for my parents, which I never applied. Despite showing them that they have erred in the appeal, the Home Office continued to argue that they have assessed it on the right grounds and you are able to look after, you've been paying for the treatment, so it's affordable until I reached the hearing. Now, one of the things your solicitor or a direct access barrister would do is to instruct an independent medical expert on your behalf. Remember, you cannot instruct a medical expert on your own because you could influence them. Therefore, one of the strategies you need to have is to instruct a UK based medical expert. So, if your parents are visiting you in the UK, for example, and you wish to apply, say, in a year or 1.5 years' time, for example, consult a solicitor and instruct a disability expert who can assess them. My parents were actually assessed not in the UK, unfortunately, because by the time adult dependent relative visa was refused, they were not going to be granted a UK visitor visa. So I had to fly them over to Switzerland. Then I flew an expert from London to Switzerland for 5 to 6 hours, which is extremely expensive, get them assessed, and then he gave an independent report. Now, the benefit of having a medical expert who's a doctor, most likely, and who understands the legal test of this visa is going to be immensely valuable and a sound investment, because then they will write in accordance to what they find in their assessment. They will not write what you want, they will write what they see. Once they write something, that becomes a medical evidence to prove that they require daily care. For example, my medical expert who we instructed stated that my parents were able to move in some sense, but some parts were working, some parts were not working, and that they were suffering from type 2 diabetes and osteoarthritis and all the medical conditions. But he noted some very important points, and he said that my father in particular is susceptible to heat stroke, and given the hot weather, the next heat stroke could be fatal. Now, that given the fact that they were living in northern part of India, which is extremely hot with temperatures going between 40 degrees to 50 degrees, it was a matter of chance when that would happen, and it could have been fatal for my father in particular. Now, he did not write that they require daily care, but the way he worded the language, I felt that it bent the pendulum in our favor, because the Home Office could not then challenge and say, we don't believe your medical expert, because they can't. He was not the family doctor, he was an independent expert instructed by my solicitors, and also he gave an independent report on his own. That was the first part, the first limb of the test. The second part was to prove that if the care is available, if the treatment is available in India, then it is not affordable. Now, this is where I did all the work. So I was asked by my solicitors to at least get a quotation from 5 to 6 residential care homes to find out the cost of living there. If we were to move our parents there, what would it cost? And then try to give them the quotation. Now, I could have chosen the easy route, which was to go to only 5 residential homes and find the most expensive ones to prove that. But I did not want to cheat the system. I wanted to be honest and upfront to the Home Office with integrity. So I went to 27 residential care homes by contacting them by email, on phone. I documented every phone call, every email I sent, and I got all the transactions in email by saying, my parents' condition is X, Y, and Z. My father suffers so and so. He requires a Lucentis injection every month, and there are chances that he may fall. And if he falls, what is the likely protocol in your residential care home? And then I started to get some quotations. So some of the quotations I got was they want a £30,000 deposit, plus they want £2,000 to £2,500 per month for just renting one room, and in that there'll be no CCTV cameras. So if there was something to happen, if there was some abuse, I could not monitor how my parents were there. And if there was an emergency, medical emergency, they would absolutely take my parents to hospital. But then any bill that we have to pay on top would be separately payable. So I had to, before even step inside that residential care home, make a £30,000 deposit. Also, they added in the contract that we have to pay washing clothes and incidental expenses for checkups and all of that. So there was a lot of variable things. Then I went to certain centers where in the southern part of India, where the cost was roughly around about £1,000 per month. But the caveat was that I spoke to some of the nurses and the staff and asked them if they speak Hindi language. And to our surprise, they did not speak Hindi language. They spoke English language, which my parents were not comfortable with. And given the fact my father was hard of hearing, there was a risk that there could be misunderstanding of instructions, especially when it comes to diabetes and macular degeneration in the eye and taking instructions. And there could be irritative behavior and how they would handle that. I was not satisfied that despite economically it was comparatively cheaper to the other residential home, the linguistics came as a factor that and the quality of care. That was why I did not select. It was a red flag for me that I cannot rely on that. If there was an incident where we could say that there was negligence on the part of them, they could simply deny that. So in this way, I collected the cost, the contract, the emails that I wrote as for 27 residential homes all across northwest, south, east part of India. Then I found an area which was relatively cooler, which was in the northern part of India around Jammu and Srinagar. But then I said that place is highly susceptible to terrorist attacks. Even though it's colder region, I cannot force my parents to move out of their home in Faridabad and move to Jammu without their consent, because that would be a breach of human right. So my angle when I was building that evidence was not of that, look, this is very expensive in India, so that's why you should grant the visa. I made sure that the cost was one of the factors, but I also showed that there were some institutions which were comparatively cheaper, but in terms of other metrics like quality, local jurisdiction compliance, health and safety, and the mental well-being, and the facility and the hygiene factors, I included all of that. Then I compiled that into a bundle of cost and contracts, converted them from INR to pound sterling, and gave them a high level view that if the judge wanted to scrutinize any contract, any email, they could see that evidence. Right? That was the second part that it. And then I also gave a comparison that if I was to hire full-time nurses at home to look after my father, which was full-time, that means 24/7, I would require 3 nurses. And the cost of the 3 nurses, I gave them a range based on what the doctors had told me. When I added that cost, clubbed them together by taking 2 or 3 quotations based on the experience, I found that it was really expensive. And not only expensive, these medical nurses were not licensed nurses. They just had worked in hospital. So if somebody is not a qualified nurse, I could not rely that they had the sound judgment to clinically assist my father with complications. And that's why I approved them. That was the second reason why that care was not affordable on the basis of lack of qualifications and the cost itself. Then I showed that what is the cost of care if they were to move to the UK at my brother's place in London. I showed them that they don't have to pay any mortgage or any rent to my brother. My brother had specifically built an extra room for my parents. He had made sure that there was wheelchair access in the bathroom, and there was enough support to make sure that both husband and wife, my brother and my sister-in-law, were working part-time. So at any point of time, if my parents were alone, there was one adult who was looking after them. Right? In this way, I was able to show that the cost of putting my parents in residential care home in India compared to the cost of having full-time nurses, 3 nurses in India, versus the cost of just feeding my parents and looking after them in London. That is what I was able to show, and that cost I was able to easily prove that it was viable option. I was not comparing that the cost of residential care home in India compared to cost of residential care home in London, because that would be wrong comparison. Sometimes what applicants do is they say, we will bring our parents, but there is not enough space in the accommodation to provide care for your parents. For example, there is overcrowding. If you do not show that you've got enough adequate finances in hand to look after not only your family, like your wife, children, but also to look after your parents. So the Home Office also looks, do you have adequate financial maintenance available to you in terms of accommodation, finances in place to be able to do that. If you fail that, if you lose a job, they can obviously refuse the visa. What else they look for is they want a sponsorship undertaking for 5 years, which means that if you want to bring your parents to the UK as an adult dependent relative, you must make sure that you cannot rely on public funds for 5 years. This is a signed undertaking that you have to give, and you have not broken any conditions. You meet the suitability, you meet the good character. Now, the most important fact that people do not understand is they try to do it themselves. I meet constantly people during the flights when I travel internationally, and they ask me, Savesh, what is the guarantee that if we spend that money, we will get the visa? And I'm here to tell you the honest truth. There is no guarantee. Even if you submit it first time, even solicitors will tell you the refusal rate is quite high. Just because you instructed a medical expert does not guarantee that things would be in your favor. Because he could say, well, they're able to walk themselves, they're able to look after themselves, or the claims are exaggerated. Because then you might need to think through that your parents do not actually need the extra care. The Home Office looks at, is there any other relative in the country who could look after your parents? I said in the witness statements of my parents that we have relatives, but first of all, they are elderly themselves, they're suffering from medical conditions, and the relations are not cordial. There is an instance where my father had a hypoglycemic episode where he collapsed. I had to fly from Switzerland to Delhi, and I had not even a single relative in the hospital. That was an evidence that I provided. I proved through the witness statements that we have relatives. I did not lie that we don't have relatives. I said we just don't have good relations with them. When there is no relation, everybody's old, two people have already passed away. So for them to rely, it is impossible. It's really important that from the very beginning you have a solicitor or a direct access barrister. Now, some of you might be wondering, what is a direct access barrister? Direct access barristers are specially qualified to take the client directly. Usually in the UK, the solicitor instructs a barrister for the hearing if there is an appeal. For example, you applied for the visa, it was refused, then you submitted the grounds of appeal through the solicitor, still the Home Office refused, then you go to the first tier tribunal for the appeal in front of the judge. Like I did. A direct access barrister can, instead of going through the entire solicitor process, can take your file from the very beginning and can advise you how to go about it and fill up the application for you and put it there. The advantage of that is that you could be saving around £6,000 to £7,000 easy. And therefore, it's really important that you do not just select any barrister. You need to make sure that you select a direct access barrister who's got specialization in the adult dependent relative visa category. During the hearing, the Home Office pleaded that we want more time because we have not had the opportunity to look at the bundle. Mind you, by then I had spent up to £10,000, and that does not even factor my time only in legal costs alone. As soon as the judge saw the bundle, the first page, the skeleton argument, that I had clearly stated in my cover letter that I'm applying for adult dependent relative visa, and they refused on the FM partner appendix, which was the spouse route, the judge wasn't happy. So the judge asked the Home Office, and then they said, we will withdraw our decision and we need some time. So the judge granted them 56 days. And finally, as soon as the corona broke out and the India got closed in 2020, early Q1, my parents got an email saying that the visa refusal decision has been overturned. Please submit your passport and your tuberculosis certificate. Now, mind you, given the fact that this visa is for more than 6 months, which means you can settle forever in the UK from the time this visa is granted. So if you are coming from a country where tuberculosis is there, then you need to get a tuberculosis certificate test done from an authorized center. They're usually provided in the Home Office website. I can point you to that also. This is really important. Then there is a English language test, but because of the fact my parents were 65 and above, we got the exemption because of that. So that's how I succeeded. My suggestion would be, don't be random, don't be like sudden. Plan it strategically. What I mean is that start documenting all the medical history, the medical readings, who was looking after them. If your mother used to initially look after your father and now she's no longer because she's got a fracture in the hip bone or she got her own medical condition, that also shows progression that you tried to look after to some extent in your home country, and now it's no longer viable. Show them with evidence. And if you instruct a direct access barrister or a solicitor and a medical expert, the chances are that you will be amongst those 4% people. Anyone thinking about adult dependent relative visa and you would like to have my consultation, to reach out as to how to collect contracts, to look at your documents, how to draft witness statements, I'm happy to do that for a fees. And in terms of guidance, how to save money on solicitors and direct access barristers, I'll be happy to guide you also. And if one of you succeeds in getting your parents to the UK, I would be most happy. I hope you've liked the video, and if you feel that I've added some value and you got some context and you would like to subscribe to the channel and stay updated for the latest insights, please do that.